Well, good afternoon, everyone. We do have some people trickling in. Again, this is Harris Rosenzweig. I'm the Director of Accessibility for TCSAccess. And my colleague to my right.
Hi, I'm Jeff Ermold. I'm the Director of Training here with TCSAccess.
And we'll be taking you through the topic today, the importance of the assistive technology assessment and supporting employees with disabilities in the enterprise. Wanted to say one more time, we will not be posting any files to the chat box. If one happens to appear, please do not try to open it or download it. Very happy to be with you. A shout out to, I believe we have a bunch of folks from Canada joining us today. So very happy shout out to you guys for joining us. I think we'll start off with Jeff, just a little history of TCSAccess. We've been around since the 1980s, and we are dedicated to the advancement of equal access for persons with disabilities. Whether it's in the enterprise, in education, or one-on-one in the home. We're very proud to be hosting this important webinar. This webinar is part of a series that we're putting out on accessibility in this 30th anniversary of the ADA. Some of our webinars are very technically oriented, whether it's on the accessibility of Microsoft Office, the G Suite, PDFs, web accessibility, be it for the desktop or mobile platform. Some are on general accessibility issues for the disability community, like one we did recently on the accessibility of voting for persons who are blind. And we're going to be repeating that on October 22nd as the election gets a little closer. Others are like the one we're doing today, which center around the accessibility in the enterprise, whether in the public or the private sector. Next week, September 24th, same time frame, 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be doing a webinar on creating accessible e-learning environments in the enterprise in partnership with MicroAssist, who is a leader in e-learning accessibility. We would like to hear from you regarding what topics that you might find of interest, and stay tuned as we build our webinar portfolio. Just a little bit of housekeeping here regarding the Zoom. Due to some scheduling conflicts, unfortunately, we don't have captioning today. However, when the presentation is posted to YouTube, on our YouTube channel, you'll be able to access the auto-generated captions. If you want to access the chat box, that's Alt-H. We'll be checking questions. We have our wonderful moderator, Matt Belcher, who's our Director of Operations, who is on the moderating duty today. And if you want to mute or unmute yourself, Alt-A is the other popular keystroke. We do want to hear from you at different points of this to get your perspective on AT assessment. A little bit of the backstory of this webinar series.
Yeah, we started this series kind of looking at the life cycle of providing reasonable accommodations, and one of the things that we've seen over the years in providing these services, and we do it in some pretty large environments, some large federal agencies and corporations. And one of the things we see is when things work well, there is kind of a life cycle approach to it. There's a comprehensive sort of organizational strategy, and the different components of the organization sort of have mapped out the flow process. So whether it's assessment, whether it's training, whether it's help desk support, procurement, installation of AT hardware and software, there's a detailed process for who does what and when it's done and how exactly it's implemented. When it's not done well, it can be a real hodgepodge, and you run into situations where the employee is kind of left in the middle, and maybe not getting the most timely or the most even appropriate accommodation. So we kind of outlined sort of some best practices in the first webinar we did last month. And then we're kind of drilling down with each of these subsequent sessions. So this one, we're going to focus exclusively on assistive technology assessments, and the importance of kind of how they flow in the overall accommodation process. If you perform an AT assessment well, it's really the cornerstone of the accommodation process, and it kind of sets the stage for the employee to receive all the other timely accommodations, like I said, that go with it, whether it's hardware, software, training, and support. So there's kind of a checklist that we'll kind of walk you through that can help you have more success when you're providing reasonable accommodations. It can also really make sure that the solution that's recommended is more cost effective and timely too. So it can actually really benefit the organization that way as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be doing this today with you, Jeff. Jeff has so many years of experience. He's handling some of our biggest contracts, training contracts with big enterprises, and both of us have really seen the gamut of things as far as accommodation goes. The backstory on this also comes from our MYAT program, which provides on-demand AT services to enterprises on an as-needed or ongoing basis around the thorny topic of accommodation, around what I like to call the last mile of accessibility, which is really what I believe our organization shines at. When you have a specific individual who has a specific need around some kind of accommodation in a specific work context. We also support organizations in helping them to implement best practices, helping them figure out, well, what do these laws and regulations around accessibility really mean? Jeff, we could maybe go over review the presentation goals.
Yeah, let's kind of walk through that a little bit. These are kind of what we're going to be hitting on.
I'll move to the next slide.
Again, at the very high level, and we'll give some examples, what to do and what to don't, kind of and further down. But we want to definitely hit on these main areas here. So basically, why the AT assessment is really a critical part of a culture of equal access for employees with disabilities. So how it really just fits into that HR culture. Then we're going to kind of walk through why the AT assessment is the cornerstone of an effective, reasonable accommodation services. It really sets the stage, like I said, for those other things like training and support and procurement. And then the role of the AT assessment and where it fits within the accommodations process. So, sometimes it's up front and sometimes it's almost a reassessment kind of a thing where you need to fine tune the accommodations. So we'll walk through those different scenarios. And the type of AT assessments that can be performed, specifically the ones that we perform here at TCSAccess. And then we'll kind of talk about the skill sets that you need, general skill sets that you need to really provide a thorough AT assessment. And again, if you have questions, please chime in. You can just unmute. You can use the chat box. You don't need to hold all your questions till the end. We're happy to have some dialogue going on if you want to chime in.
Yeah, so we'll take certain key breaks after certain sections. So before we get into discussing maybe where AT assessment fits into the accommodation process, I just wanted to really stress, that AT accommodations, assessments really come in a particular context. Sometimes that context is fairly straightforward. A person maybe has tripped and fallen and broken their arm, and they need a way to input information into the computer temporarily. Once their arm heals, then it's back to business as usual for that person. Or maybe there's something a bit more charged, something that Jeff and I are going to take on as an actual example to kind of take you through the assessment process. Someone maybe who has diabetes, whose vision has been deteriorating, their vision has taken a major downturn and they're having trouble viewing the screen. Or maybe someone who has been in a bad fall and has experienced a head injury and is having trouble with their short-term memory. Other scenarios that can come up revolve around, you have a new hire. Maybe that person has a disability and you have no knowledge of their past history with assistive technology or their situation. Maybe there's an existing employee who uses assistive technology at your firm and they're changing jobs. and there are some unknowns around how that assistive technology will do with their new tasks. As Jeff has said, in each of these situations, how much of a culture of accommodation and equal access that you've built up internally, your knowledge about disability, technology, solutions, accessibility is really going to pay off in spades. So let's face it, this is a very sensitive topic, AT assessment. More often than not, employees are very stressed over acknowledging they have lost maybe some functionality. Our culture is not very set up to acknowledge weakness. So the more transparent we are as an organization and knowledgeable we are, the better that this assessment process that Jeff has spoken about is going to go. Jeff, do you want to, any other comments along those lines?
Yeah, no, I just want to reiterate that I think as much as there can be open dialogue, there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered from a lot of different parties, and and not to make assumptions too quickly in the process. I think that's the main thing. Even if it could be a temporary situation where it is a fall or an injury that requires a different way of interacting with the computer, different way of doing the job functions. Could be something more permanent, but sometimes there are assumptions made, even if it's a long time AT user. If somebody's used a screen reader or speech recognition or whatever it might be for a long period of time, there's an assumption that they may be an expert in those areas, or that those particular tools will always work in every environment, and that's not always the case. So it's just to try to make sure you keep an open mind and open dialogue to all those scenarios.
I totally agree. Before we jump into the meat of this, I wanted to put something out there to the enterprise organizations who may be listening. Maybe you're already doing this, but I certainly haven't seen a lot of this in 30 years of working in the field. When you start a new job at a government agency or a large entity, you have to take an enormous amount of training. Usually it's online training, whether it's about internet security, safety within the workplace, whatever it is. But I've never seen anything that talks about disability, maybe what's built into your operating system as far as accommodating, maybe your vision's changing. There's so many things that we could be learning about when you're a new employee. And boy, what would that say about that organization if that was part of the onboarding process? If that was included in your training.
Yeah, and there's also assumptions that can be made in our society. A lot of times there's an assumption that the disability or all these accommodations may still not have a level playing field. But so I think it's important to keep an open mind about that. Right.
So let's jump in. I think we need to kind of frame what we're talking about here. We talked about having a culture of equal access, and let's talk about maybe the goal of an AT assessment and some definitions. Well, the first one we have is one that we've kind of worked on ourselves, and the second one is concerns more of an education focus. Jeff, do you want me to read those, or?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is the one we came up with. The definition goal of an AT assessment: the process of determining what strategies, technologies, and training are necessary to enable the employee requesting an accommodation to perform the essential functions of their job at the level expected. So there's a whole lot in there, which touches on maybe the individuals that need to be involved, the different processes that need to go on within the AT assessment, and everything that needs to take place. The other definition we found regarding education, an assistive technology assessment is a collaborative process initiated by an assistive technology professional with ongoing support, communication, training, and revision as needed. So I can't stress enough the collaborative nature of it, the dynamic nature of an assessment where it's not something that just happens within 2 hours and then that's it. And the communication that's needed amongst all the parties that are involved.
Yeah, and when you talk about sort of when, I guess the next question is, when do you do an AT assessment? Well, there's a lot of different scenarios with that. Basically, if you think about any change that happens, and that change could be a brand new hire, what do they need, you know, to as the baseline accommodation to get up and running, get onboarded, start to learn and get into those core job functions. A disability that's sort of onset, so somebody's in the middle of, you know, they're already part of the organization, they're in the middle of their career, and all of a sudden a disability happens in one form or another, and so they need to really, and those can be really complex and challenging because you're literally doing a job a different way that you've been doing it for so many years. And basically with job changes, so as you move along throughout the organization, through your career in the organization, you know, especially we have a lot of our clients are federal clients, so they tend to be longer term career kinds of positions where your role is going to change, you're going to move up over the years, and your core job functions will change. So an analysis needs to be done for those new tasks. What does the new job entail in that new role, and are those systems accessible? Is there a different way of performing those jobs, or maybe not? Maybe the existing assistive technology is perfectly fine, but more training is needed for the new systems and how the AT interacts. So it's really any kind of change. The change in technology, this is constant. With, you know, dynamic organizations with dozens and dozens and dozens of proprietary applications, we see this all the time. All of a sudden somebody will be, you know, their AT is working great with a database, and a major upgrade has pushed down, and literally they come in Monday morning and all the screens are different. We see this all the time. And, you know, in the best case scenario, there's been a testing protocol, 508, and the accessibility teams are pre-flight testing before these are deployed. But even if something passes 508, there's a usability factor and often a training factor that's involved. So those, again, are accommodations where, you know, necessitated by just the constant change in the technology of the organization.
That's so true, Jeff. And as you said, it's the AT assessment is not something that's static. It's dynamic. It's part of a continuum of services. You use the word life cycle, and it's very much connected with all of the various tasks that person has, the training that they need, and the accessibility of the software. And so Jeff and I thought one of the best ways to illustrate the AT assessment was to talk about a particular example. In this one we've chosen, and it really could be any disability, any change or disruption to a person's ability to perform the essential functions of their job. Let's say we have an employee who has a condition that has progressively impacted their vision. And the employee and the supervisor are noticing there might be a need for some form of assessment here. So Jeff, let's start talking about, you know, what is like the first thing we would want to do if this were to land on our desk, this particular situation.
Well, in terms of a vision, well, really any type of assessment, but just kind of using as a vision, the vision condition that's progressive. And then, of course, this is a very, very common scenario, as there are conditions such as type 2 diabetes are very common with, affecting visual changes, something like macular degeneration as people age. So very common. Basically, let's say we have an employee and a supervisor that have noticed there's some changes in the visual situation, and there needs to be an assessment. So with that assessment, basically you want to do a job task analysis. So even though, it's assumed somebody has been doing the role for a long time, you really want to sit down and look at those core job functions and see, okay, are you having some more challenges doing any one of those because of this visual change? And you want to also look at the medical diagnosis and see, if there's some guidance there and some prognosis for sort of how the condition might progress in the future. You kind of want to just make a mental checklist of all these things. You want to, before you even try technology, you want to make this checklist, and you want to say, well, we might want to try different monitors. We might want to try magnification software. If we're dealing still with documents, we might want to look at video magnifiers, a desktop video magnifier. And again, these are just examples, but to do a really thorough assessment, you want to have these things in the back of your mind for when the time comes to actually you might need to do some hands-on trial and error kinds of things with the employee, and see if those help in those situations. What can be done in the operating system? There might be some things built right in. Maybe they just need a little bit of magnification, a little bit of speech output in different areas. And there's more and more accessibility built right into the operating systems. So, just keep those kinds of things in mind. Sometimes in a progressive condition, it's not necessary or even advisable to jump all the way right into a screen reader, because as I'm sure many of us know, there's quite a steep learning curve for a new user in the middle of a career to suddenly have to learn something like a screen reader. What is the approval? What approval is needed to demo the equipment? There's a lot of restrictions in secure agencies, particular federal agencies. We run into this quite a bit. So who do we need to be talking to bring in some technology to even do the assessment, to assess, have these, what software has been approved by the control board, has a screen reader, a screen magnifier been tested against the agency's applications and so forth. And basically, you need a subject matter expert. You might need somebody in the organization who really knows these applications inside and out. Is there, in a sense, accessibility testing that's needed? And I don't mean, detailed 508 level testing, but once you introduce a piece of AT and you have proprietary applications, it may not have been thoroughly tested against those to see if it's compatible. We see that very, very frequently. And then we kind of have to do some personal assessment, the person's ability to learn and get a sense of where they are. And again, this is always a moving target. Training is an ongoing thing, but to get an idea of what would be a realistic starting amount of training. Often we get requests for training that quite frankly seem very arbitrary. And there's a lot of different reasons why that is. It might be because an agency is used to ordering training in certain blocks. So they order an 8-hour blocks or 16-hour blocks or whatever it might be. And there are obviously reasons for that, procurement reasons and so forth. But to set a realistic expectation of what's coming down the pike so that, sure, it might be an 8-hour or 20-hour or 50-hour increments, but to get from point A all the way to the finish line, it's going to, it might take 40 or 50 or 60 hours of training, or it might take some training, some use, sort of a blended approach, some use, and then go back to more training when there's trouble areas discovered. So again, it's all about communicating expectations up front so that everybody knows what to expect.
Yeah, so I've seen some things pop up in the chat, and we're giving a lot of information, and I can only imagine for some of you it's a lot to take in, all of these different facets of an AT assessment. These are excellent areas that Jeff has mentioned, and you can imagine all of the professionals that might need to be involved inside your organization. You know, the supervisor and the manager, IT may need to get involved. As you as an assistive technology professional, or as it was for us, and we were getting the initial information, we're going to be building a mental checklist of things we would like to try with that individual. Before we introduce any third-party software or hardware or solution, we're going to want to see if we can do something with the built-in features of, say, Windows. Maybe they're using an Apple. Maybe they're using a tablet or a smartphone. We want to use what's built in, and there are so many things built in to the operating system these days. Then, if those things don't work, we'll maybe consider introducing a third-party piece of software. Maybe it's a screen reader, maybe it's speech recognition software like Dragon, maybe a combination of things. And to do that, to be able to install that software, we're going to need the support of IT. And we're going to want to know how well those programs interact with their day-to-day tasks, their day-to-day applications. So there is something involved here, but there is a method to the madness. When you consider all of those things and you're including the individual, you're showing them possible solutions, you're bringing them along, you're bringing the management along, IT is being brought along, maybe you do need to include the 508 coordinator as well if there is an issue around accessibility. Maybe human resources is involved. Some of these situations are quite charged. We have been in many situations over the years where there has been a question about a person's ability to perform the essential functions of their job as expected. And we sometimes know why we're being brought in. We're doing an assessment and we're trying to measure, is this person capable of doing the job as expected? Which can be a very charged situation. And sometimes it can work out for the better. Maybe there is a job or a restructuring that can happen. The point we're trying to make is that there really are a lot of steps to this. It is a dynamic process. And Jeff, I wanted to get into for a moment before we stop and hear from our wonderful audience participants about what typically happens when we first get a referral.
Well, yeah, these are the best practices we're giving you, but
right.
The reality is we don't always. That's not always the scenario. So basically, a lot of times we get very, very little information. You know, that's probably the most common. Also fairly common is misinformation. So that might be something that you know, someone is having, you know, the vision has deteriorated to a certain degree. And again, we often don't know all of the details of that. So they want something, they need JAWS to read long excerpts of text or to read emails for them. Well, JAWS can certainly do that. JAWS can read as little or as much as you need it to read. But any of you that have used JAWS or trained on JAWS or supported JAWS know that's kind of overkill. JAWS is a really powerful tool, but learning a screen reader just to do a couple of commands and then having all of that verbosity going on all the time may not be the best scenario. Maybe there's just something built right in to the operating system or to the applications that can read certain parts of text. You know, and then there's just sort of presuppositions, like we've mentioned. That there's already been an assumption that in other words, the assessment is almost a formality, and it will say, well, the person needs, they need dragon and jaws. We've run into this kind of combination, just for an example. They need to be able to, they're having some dexterity issues, they're having some repetitive strain issues, and their visual condition has changed a bit. So they need, again, as strain sets in throughout the day, they might want a large document read to them. Well, dragon and jaws, while they can certainly play together with a bridge product called JSA, that's a really complicated solution for, there's some other options that could be tried before. So it's I think often what happens is, again, if you're not interacting with these technologies every day, you may not understand the nuances of this, and you might recommend the wrong tool or more complex tool. And then, of course, there will be more assumptions. There'll be assumptions that the person simply can't do those functions with the accommodations, when the accommodations were actually probably not the most ideal accommodations in the first place. So, and you had an example recently with
oh yeah. Yes, so many examples are going through my head. I wanted to just share one, and I have such a frustration, and I get it, folks. You don't have the resources maybe, and you want to create a checklist approach so that when something happens in the workplace, that you have some mechanism, some process in place to get people some kind of solution. Well, that can actually go quite wrong. We've just started to work with people in their homes again, using protective equipment. We got a referral. A woman working at a federal agency lost all of her vision. She's totally blind. And because the agency had a checklist approach, they went down the list and they shipped her 2 gigantic 27-inch monitors to her home. And she has absolutely no vision. The other really huge red flag, which no one asked the question, and this whole process took months for her to get even this checklist approach of equipment, she didn't know how to type. So if you're blind, and you may not get this initially, if you're blind and you don't know how to touch type, where you're a hunt and peck, and you have to look at the keyboard, and if you can't see, you can't do that. You have to first learn how to type. So the other consequence of this checklist approach, if you're recommending Dragon for someone because you think it might be faster for them to get information into the computer because it doesn't make any spelling errors. Well, as Jeff said, it can add huge amounts of complexity unnecessarily to that person, costing time and frustration and headache and lots of money. And the last thing I wanted to say was, if you can have internal knowledge, an internal person who's taking point on this, who is an assistive technology professional, who does have that deep knowledge of how these programs work and interact, and how they work in an enterprise environment with all the security restrictions that you have, that is really the best to have. When you have to contract it out, that can take a little bit of extra time. But if you have that internal knowledge, if you can build that, that would be the best. Jeff, should we take any questions or anything else you wanted to add at this time?
No, I think that's great. If we have some questions, feel free to.
Matt, do you want to?
Yeah, I was just going to mention there were a few chats that have been posted.
Okay.
Removed, posted. Often an organization's culture is not inclusive or person-centered, but it's more focused on the bottom line. In such situation, a conversation regarding accessibility is regarding it as expense and gets punted. Speaking, that was early off in the discussion. Anne-Marie mentioned that we find that access needs to start with the recruitment process too, as you were mentioning.
Mm-hmm.
And we also posed the question, is there a workflow engagement model for the assessment process, which I think is what you were kind of referring to, checklist. And while that's not always a good idea.
Right. So Jeff, we have often an organization's culture is not inclusive or person-centered. They're more focused on the bottom line expense. It's too costly to do accessibility. probably referring to the software accessibility side of things and making software accessible, I'm assuming. You want to say anything about that, Jeff?
Well, you know, it's again, it's those presuppositions. It's I think that often the accommodation, you know, itself maybe less than $1,000. I mean, there's a lot of data out there that says, you know, it's a fairly reasonable undertaking. It's just like you say, I think sometimes organizations want to go ahead and they have a big hiring initiative, but where I think that this challenge is they haven't really looked at, okay, who are we going to hire? What roles are we going to fill? And then again, doing that internal work first to look at those systems, see how accessible they are, test them against some AT, you know, common AT scenarios. So the assumption is, oh, we made this big initiative. We wanted to hire X number more employees with disabilities, and it just doesn't work out. It's just too costly, or it's too costly on the AT expenditure. And again, you're looking at, you know, there's all sorts of data out there about the loyalty and the efficiency and productivity of employees with disabilities once that investment is made. You know, if you make the investment to make the internal systems accessible, then you can just keep hiring. You can keep recruiting employees with disability because you know that the AT is going to interact with it. So it's it can't be, the hiring decision just can't be made in a vacuum. And I think if it is, then you run into those scenarios where people just focus on the cost factor because they haven't done the work ahead of time.
Yes, I'd just like to say a few things about that, the cost side of things. I think there's an argument to be made where it can cost you an incredible amount of money in lost time and resources. Just that one example I gave you of the woman, they went back and forth for months sending her 2 large monitors. Imagine this, someone had to send an email out to the procurement department to get those monitors in, to ship them out, to get them to her house. She had to get them in her door, only to find that they had to be shipped back again. And for us to then come in and advise that she needs to learn how to type and that this should have happened months ago. And if that had happened months ago, she would have been ready for the solutions where she did need speech output, like a JAWS type program. But who knows how many tens of thousands of dollars in time and effort were expended on just that one individual, I think. And there are so many low-cost things that an organization can do, such as, you know, short videos on what is available in your Windows operating system or how to use your iPhone in a different way. There are so many low-cost things in creating that culture of equal access, educating your IT staff when you have to do a refresh of all of your systems, making sure your IT are understanding of how that may impact people who are using a particular version of a particular assistive technology. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do to minimize the chaos that can ensue if things go wrong. I want to make sure I answer all these questions. We start with the recruitment process. Absolutely. When that person first comes in, you need to assess their needs, making sure that they are accommodated. That's just part of the process. Is there a workflow engagement model for the assessment process? Yes. Some of that is up on the screen right now in the expertise and skill sets. Some of that is in the flow that Jeff and I have spoken about. I'm just going through my slides here, and we can provide this PowerPoint to you and that flow. We have a slide at the end on who to email for that.
Harris, we've had a couple.
Yeah, if you could, Matt.
Absolutely. All right. The first is from Cindy Meadows. She said, I've had an increase in referrals for clients working at home in customer service jobs. For our JAWS users, accessing remote desktop applications has been a challenge for them. This is where communication with the company's IT department is key, because they need to install JAWS with remote desktop support added to the license on their server.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And that's not automatic. So that's a different type of licensing, and that's of course communicating with IT and the security folks to allow that. But in that particular situation, it sounds like the JAWS user actually needs to remote entirely into the environment so that they have full access, just as if they were sitting in the office. And JAWS will support that. There is remote desktop speech and remote desktop braille, but that's a different type of license, a different type of configuration. And of course, there has to be some adjustments to firewall access and so on and so forth. But it can be done, and it's a pretty powerful feature of JAWS.
And I like how you did write about that communication. It is a collaborative effort. The earlier you can jump on these things and to have that relationship and to connect back to the manufacturer of JAWS, the Vispero is the current one, to make sure they're in the loop and they're talking to your IT people as well, so that when issues do come up, they can troubleshoot it together and show you their employees that you value their work.
All right, there's one more question. What should I consider, or what kinds of questions should I ask to make sure a new employee with disabilities will be successful in their new role?
Right. Jeff, can I start in?
Yeah.
Okay. So what a great question this is. So if you have an employee and if they have a known disability, I would just have a very frank discussion with them and say, and asking them, what kinds of tools do you currently use or have you used in a prior job that have worked best for you? Please share that with us, and we can see if those tools, if we can install them, configure them on your work system. So I would start there, a very frank discussion of what tools did you use, what strategies worked best for you, as we wish to be accommodating as much as possible. And so then you can then take that information. Maybe you have to interact with the IT team. Maybe it's not a technology related accommodation. Maybe it's some sort of restructuring of the job. So that's how I would begin the discussion.
I think there's two phases to that too. I think there's the HR part of it, right? So in the, you know, if you're interviewing somebody, they look like a solid candidate, they've sort of made it through the screening process and so forth, and you really would like to hire this person, there's sort of on the global side of it, which is kind of like you're saying, Harris, in terms of, you know, what do you, is there hardware and software that you're already using? And, you know, okay, that it's working well for you. That's sort of your basic access to the environment, right? So we can procure those things for you here when you're onboarded. But then there's the ultimate job that they're doing. So that's kind of that second piece. And if you want that to be successful, that's where it really gets, you know, can get more involved. So bringing in the direct supervisor early on, obviously they would, the hiring manager would want to do those interviews anyway. And so, you know, if the hiring manager is comfortable with that kind of conversation, has some training in that kind of conversation to, you know, discuss those core job functions, and then kind of drill down on those and say, okay, well, for task A, this is what's required, and you know, how would the assistive technology provide you the ability to do that? Or and if the prospective employee is not aware, then you really want to bring the AT specialist in sooner than later. if you want this, to be successful with everyone. If you don't have that subject matter knowledge in-house, you want to bring someone in that can help understand the core job functions and then kind of connect that with the AT access.
I
It's kind of the global and the specific way of approaching hiring.
Couldn't agree more. And it needs to be an engaged process. The earlier you find out about what needs or accommodations that person has, and the earlier, once you've decided to hire them, that you can try to implement those things, whether it's technology-based or other-based, the better. The smoother it's going to go for you and your employee. There is a lot of knowledge that goes along with assistive technology integration of a system. It's one thing to acquire a copy of say a screen reader or a speech recognition program like Dragon, but there's some configuration that often needs to be done in Windows to make it a little easier for that person to use all of their standard programs. So it's not just a matter of installing the program and you're ready to go. Yeah.
And we focused a lot on obviously the hardware and software side of this and the technical side of it. But of course, there's ergonomics is a key piece of that. I mean, we could do a whole session just on ergonomics, but that often is part of the accommodation too. And so, whether it be a different keyboard, a different mouse, a different chair, all those kinds of things. Again, if someone is accommodated, they're going to be a more productive and included part of the workforce, and that's really important too. So obviously we certainly, I didn't want to leave out ergonomics. We certainly do ergonomics as part of an overall assessment as well.
That's right. One of our bullet points was the types of AT assessments that we do. We did focus on a vision example there, but we work with all disabilities. We work with persons who are deaf, blind, hard of hearing, low vision blind, people with dexterity and neurodiversity issues, and often combinations of all of those. That's where we really dig into the details. We bring people together, and we have a very engaged process, because we know there are a lot of players in all of this. This slide here, internal teams and individuals needed for AT assessment. We've got everyone you can possibly think of up here, from the AT specialist, who I believe should be leading this whole effort, to the folks who are doing procurement. Okay, just Matt, any other?
Nikki, who posed the previous question, just said thank you for the thoughtful response. Very helpful. And
Sure. Sure.
It's about 9 minutes remaining until 2 o'clock. So this one.
Yes. So Jeff, I think we could do like a little summary of the skill sets. We've covered a lot of ground here. Just want to be encouraging that there absolutely is a process that you can follow. Whether we're doing an ergonomic assessment or we're doing an assessment for someone with multiple issues, multiple disabilities, the process doesn't change. The technology and the solutions that you have to be knowledgeable about, those might change, but the process itself is going to remain fundamentally the same, which has been one of our bedrocks as we go through this. We've talked about having an understanding of disability from a medical and a functional perspective. Just going back to these slides here, being able to do a careful job task analysis, understanding assistive technology and information technology and how they integrate, as well as non-technology solutions. And the ability to work with all of the different parties, whether it's the IT geek guy and that's all he wants to talk about, all the way down to the supervisor and explaining in great detail what might be possible and what might not be possible.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that just because I always laugh when we talk about that, because what we see often is if you don't have a comprehensive approach and bring everybody in and sort of set the expectations from the beginning, a lot of times we run into the IT folks are saying, well, this just doesn't work with our system, or they're scared to death. They literally, I can't tell you how many times over the years we've heard, we don't want to put JAWS on that system. That might contaminate the system, or Dragon, or whatever it might be. So there's a lot of fear of the unknown, and these are super technical folks, but they never have interacted. They've just not had the opportunity to interact with AT before. So it's kind of doing some education there as well to say, hey, these are secure tools. They're not going to compromise the environment. And it's just an education piece for everybody involved.
Exactly. I think you can see the depth and the breadth of what's involved in an AT assessment. And I'll say it again, you really want to try to have internal expertise in this area. So when it comes up, you'll have someone, at least one person. We had a contract with a medium-sized federal agency, and we had 4 full-time staff working with about 750 employees with disabilities of different types. And we could have used more staff. So that's just one example there. So Jeff, I think I'm going to just talk a little bit about our MYAT slide here. So that said, if you don't have that internal resource, you can consider our MYAT service. It's an on-demand liaison between AT users and IT support. It can be. It can take on many different types of, many forms, whether it's training that's needed, whether it's providing train-the-trainer services. For example, if you needed a training on how to do AT assessments, as one example, or working specifically with an individual within your organization who may have assistive technology needs.
It could also be for this support and management as well. We just did a workshop last couple of days you were involved in with training on document accessibility. So that's another way of accommodating, because you're teaching folks that create and distribute documents throughout the organization how to do that accessibly and effectively, so that people who use AT can actually access that information.
So where do you get this information? I've got our last slide here. You can email myself, Harris, Harris, at TCSAccess.com. That's Tango Charlie Sierra, access.com. We have information here on our Facebook page, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We'll also send you a specific link to where you can access the MYAT services, which is right on our website, where that you can read about that. We do have a few minutes left. Any other questions, comments, Matt?
There is a chat message. It's from Ramu. In supported employment, the job coach who is supporting the person with disability can be a last-minute resource to advocate for assistive technology and accommodations while working with the employer.
Good point. Yeah, there's definitely can be a role for if an individual is using those kinds of services, as eligible services. It could be state rehabilitation or other agencies, nonprofit agencies, providing those extra supports, job coaching, and someone who can sort of work again with the technical folks, with the AT specialists, just to make sure that things are moving along and the person is being accommodated appropriately.
Yes, that job coach is going to have the most intimate knowledge of what that person is doing, what challenges that they're having, and be probably the best advocate for them, if they can't advocate for themselves, for whatever accommodations that might be needed. Feel free to unmute yourself too if you want to chime in. I hope this has been informative. We hope to interact with you on future webinars as well, and we'll stay on for another minute or two here.
My name is Michael Rogers. I have a question for you.
Sure.
I was wondering, I have dyslexia. I do see, but I use Dragon and JAWS for a screen reader. But I was wondering if you recommend looking at stuff differently because of my dyslexia. I also, so you know, have cerebral palsy. So that's why I use Dragon to type for me. So I just was curious if you have any recommendations of other software to look at. Thank you.
I might take I think you've made a good choice there. If you have a vision impairment and you need the JAWS, I've worked for many years with two gentlemen who are using Dragon, JSA, and JAWS.
Do you use the JSA scripts as well, Michael?
Yes. I do. I seem to have more struggle with like doing macros and learning that piece of it.
Right.
To be able to do better without. I have dyslexia too, so I use it to read stuff, but I have more trouble with. I'm trying to get better at PowerPoint and Excel, so I have more skills to do things. So
sure.
That's why I was asking the question.
Since we're low on time, your solutions are really good. They're spot on, especially if you have dyslexia. Dragon is not going to make those spelling errors. It will make mistakes, but it will help you with that. I think you have a good solution. And yes, it is challenging to use those with Excel and PowerPoint. If you wanted to check out, we might be able to provide some training opportunities.
Yeah, feel free to email, and if you have specific, questions, we can take those offline.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Hey, Harrison, right here at 2 o'clock.
Okay.
We can hang out for another minute or so.
Yeah, if there's maybe one last question. Anyone want to feel brave enough to unmute themselves?
All day? Unmute?
I have a question.
Yes.
How would you advise that I communicate with the school district? I have a consumer who's working down in St. Mary's, and she's having an awful hard time getting her software accommodations through the school district. I have provided her the software, but of course they're saying, because I guess it's an outside purchase, they have to get special permissions to install it on their devices. But I would think that they should already have the licenses to this software to put on, for her to have access to as part of the accommodation requirements.
Right. The education system is its own ecosystem, isn't it? And depending on the nature of the disability, whether there's a teacher of the visually impaired involved or some other, or if you're the main professional involved, I don't know if I have any specific advice for you. If you found the right people to talk to, if there are assistive technology people, and you have a solution, it sounds like you're working your way through a very complicated process. If you're confident in that solution,
so this particular piece of software has been recommended in the IEP process?
Yeah, so it's not for a student, it's for the employee.
Oh, for the employee.
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
I see.
Okay.
I see.
So this is all through Doors. I'm a Doors counselor. I'm quite sure you've seen my name across things.
Sure.
So we have given her the software. She was, she went through the assessment process and was recommended Fusion.
Okay.
And we know she uses it on her personal side of life and has used it in the past.
So she changed jobs or got a job, and the employer is saying, we're scared to death of this Fusion software.
Well, no, she's already had the job, but it's the new school year. So I guess she has to go through, requesting accommodations all over again.
Oh, okay.
And the school district is giving her the runaround. It's kind of seeming as if they don't want to provide her the accommodations?
So if this person is getting training or about to get training, that person may be able to find out a little bit more about what's going on, and be able to relay an intelligent way to the powers that be. Sometimes it's hard to find the right person to communicate with, regarding the need for the accessibility and what's actually going on. So that can be half the battle. But if they have a good solution, they're getting the right training on the tasks that they need. That's really the key. That's really where to start.
Right.
And that success right there can translate into some more pertinent action, I would think.
Yeah, it ultimately is an EEO requirement. You know, you hate to go down that road and become confrontational, but it ultimately is. It's not a matter of whether they choose to or not choose to provide the accommodation requirement. If the accommodation is reasonable, they do need to provide it.
Right.
Yeah, there's not much leg to stand on here, especially an assessment's been done, person needs this as an accommodation, maybe they're getting some training, so yeah.
Okay.
I would just stay in touch with the person doing the training.
Okay, will do. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Next Thursday at 1 p.m., accessibility of e-learning.